Hi guys, it's Damien and Sophie from the Student Physio podcast. We're going to be talking to Alistair today, who's the learning disabilities physio. He's going to be telling us all about what he does and all like that. It's really interesting. Hope you enjoy it.
You guys know the drill. Follow us on Instagram at student_physio_podcast. Same for YouTube, and you can listen to this on Spotify, Apple, and still YouTube. Hope you enjoy the episode.
So, welcome, Alistair.
Hi guys, thank you very much for letting me be here. Appreciate your time. Thank you.
Welcome. Thank you for your time today and taking it to talk to us.
So we're just going to start by doing a quick icebreaker, get to know you round. So first question, would you rather be doing a city break on a holiday or a kind of beach adventurous mountain one?
Oh, I like the sound of adventurous mountain, but I have been known for a city break, but I have to go for a bit of beach and adventuring, please.
Beach and adventure.
Mm-hmm.
I can see the benefits of that. I think I like looking at buildings and different cultures. Although I do like sitting on the beach and with an alcoholic drink in the sunshine.
I've been known to do a bit of a city break as well.
I think I'd go beach. Actually.
Yeah, I think I'll go city. Okay, next question: sweet or savoury?
Sweet.
Savoury for me.
I think I have to go sweet. Sorry, guys. And Alistair, what would you do if you weren't a physio?
As little as possible to earn as much as possible.
That is a good answer. I like that.
Don't know.
Just like Alistair, I'd probably be a professional footballer too.
Yeah. Yeah. Let's hope we don't have any footballers listening to this. Okay, so if we could start by could you tell us a bit about what you do outside of physio? So a bit about you, hobbies and things like that.
So outside of physio, I am a dad. I've got a 7-year-old little girl, Madeline, who is a fabulous challenge. I am a rugby fan, former rugby player. Did pretty well with that as a young'un. I like trying to keep fit. I like picking up heavy things. Not such a fan of running, but I do it because of the benefits of it. I like downhill mountain biking where you push your bike up to the top and go wee on the way down with lots of jumps. Although I trashed my back wheel yesterday. Music, family time. You know, I've got 2 dogs as well, so out walking them. So yeah, just pretty normal stuff, I think.
Epic. What team do you support for rugby?
I'm a Leicester Tigers fan by trade. Good season so far. Good start, isn't it? Good start to the season.
Yeah.
And this weekend was a bit of a rugby bonanza, wasn't it? With the Autumn Nations series coming to a close.
Yeah. Anyway, it's been an exciting few weeks for rugby. So other than your home life and non-physio life, how did you decide that you wanted to do like learning disabilities and things like that?
I didn't, funnily enough. I wanted to be a lawyer at first. Went into, and then I did my classic sort of school-based work experience, went to a law firm and realised that there's a lot of incredible tediousness and dullness and paperwork that goes into the background that goes on that you don't see. And I just thought it'd be standing up in court shouting object. Maybe that's a bit of a disconnect between my expectation and reality. But I spent the week photocopying documents that were 3,000 pages long and was like, oh my word. And so then I was sort of at a crisis, because obviously, at 16, you have to have your entire career nailed down according to schools.
Yeah.
So I had a massive crisis of confidence of what am I going to do in my life. That's just after, getting through the stress, which is GCSEs and whatnot. And I, through sport, come across physio quite a lot. I got a friend who got cystic fibrosis, so he had physio. I'd got a friend who had, one of our family friends had 2 knee replacements. I also got a brother who got Down syndrome, John. We used to go to physio, but I didn't know it was physio when we were kids. We used to go to this place, and I just thought it was a nice way to mess around and play. And I always liked that concept of exercise and physical activity being enjoyable, and I thought maybe that's something that I can bring to that. And so I fell into learning disabilities because when I graduated in 2010, which I know is an ice age ago for you guys, There were no jobs.
Have you seen my face? 2010 wasn't that long ago for me.
Doesn't feel that long ago, does it? But from a student point of view, there were no jobs. I was the only person, I think, to secure a job on my cohort before leaving university, and our cohort were about 120 people. And so this was a job that came up, and it fit my skills with my support and learning disabilities for my personal experience with my brother. And it was a physio job, and I was like, well, they are gold dust at the moment. I think a third of my cohort are no longer in the profession. It was pretty bad back then. And thankfully that's not necessarily the case now, because the investment and the value of physiotherapy is being respected a lot more, I think, within healthcare. So that's how I sort of ended up in the speciality, and never really looked back.
That is incredible. That's quite a whirlwind.
Yeah. So what kind of physiotherapy were, if you don't mind saying, your brother with Down syndrome, what kind of physiotherapy was he going through?
So I think when we were, I mean, for me it was let's play in the ball pit on the balance beam, and lots of player. My brother and I, he was 15 months older than us, so we were both young. But looking back on it now, they were looking at his developmental reflexes and looking at whether we can hit his reflex milestones as part of his adolescence. He got Down syndrome, which predisposes him to hypermobility, and balance and coordination and proprioceptive issues. So they were trying to work and build on those things. But obviously at the time, it was just a fun place to go where the staff were nice and they had a giant teddy in the corner. That's my one memory that I have of the place.
What age was he? What age were you?
So I would have been, I don't know. I mean, it might have one of those things that just always was when you're a kid. So I think from the age of about 3 till 5, I seem to remember going there.
Yeah.
So he would have been 4 to 6 for him.
Wow, it's quite young. So before we dive a bit deeper into kind of your profession, could you just define for the people listening learning disabilities?
Yeah, and it's a really good question, actually, because it's one that is hugely misrepresented even by professionals in the area, and it absolutely peeves me off. So a learning disability is actually defined quite simply by the NHS as anything which affects the way a person learns new things throughout their lifetime, which is specifically non-specific. In practical terms, what that means is it's normally tied to IQ, but we understand the fallibility of the IQ assessment ratings. But an IQ of 70 or below is usually touted to be the threshold for the diagnosis of learning disability. Now, it's not helped by places like the US, where learning disability and learning difficulty are defined as the same thing, and they're interchangeable. But if I'm getting all Normany about this, and sorry if anybody's called Norman listening, but a learning difficulty would be something that is specific to a particular area of living or life. So dyslexia, for example, not to say that dyslexia isn't disabling, but it affects a specific set of characteristics around how somebody learns. It doesn't affect your ability to cook a meal, or it may do, but not to the same level of as learning disability, and it isn't so wide reaching as to affect every single area of somebody's life, whereas learning disability does. And that's it. That's all a learning disability is. If I can go a bit preachy here, the challenge that I have with the definition of learning disability is it's given as it's written on people's death certificates as a cause of death. And as you can see, the definition of learning disability has no bearing on somebody's ability to fight off infection or tissue healing or metabolic systems or their immune systems. I'm struggling with that word this morning. With their immune systems, and yet it is written as a cause of death. And I think there's a real disconnect in how we as a healthcare system support people who have a learning disability, because we presume that it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy, as we don't treat people with learning disabilities the right way in healthcare. People with learning disabilities have poor health, and then we attribute that to the fact they've got a learning disabilities, which is what we call diagnostic overshadowing. So, but that's sort of skipping on a little bit here, but just to break it down, learning disability, the way affects the way somebody learns new things throughout their life.
Do you think that that's that it's more based around the fact that that's the path of least resistance, that somebody that, or not somebody, but as the institution surrounding learning disability writes that its cause of death is due to their learning disability, rather than digging deeper and actually working at trying how to change it systemically.
Massively. And if we look, there are some very dedicated people out there. There's a lady called George Julian on Twitter, and she will live tweet inquests into the deaths of people who have a learning disability. And time again, it has shown up how diagnostic overshadowing manifests itself, in so much as people don't have the understanding of what learning disability is, or treat people differently because of their learning disabilities, or attribute physical manifestations to the fact that somebody has a learning disability. For example, if you have pain in your wisdom tooth, or potentially a precancerous cells or some sort of growth in your mouth that is causing you excruciating pain, and you start banging your head against the wall because you can't necessarily have the linguistic skills to be able to communicate that this really hurts. What is this? I don't understand. Can you help me with that? All you know is it hurts. I want it stopped. What we see is someone banging their head against the wall and go, well, they've got a learning disability. That's what we're going to call a challenging behavior. What we're going to do is stop you banging your head against the wall, but not actually investigate why you're doing that in the first place.
Yeah,
that's a really simple sort of example, but there are much worse ones.
And then if there's a cognitive element and linguistic element to the disability, then it's very difficult to then find out what the actual problem is in the first place.
Yeah, it certainly is. And, we know by seeing mainstream patients that most people, say if we're talking non-specific low back pain, can you describe your pain? And most people find that really tricky. And that's dealing with people who don't have an inherent IQ deficit because of whatever condition in the first place. So when you are working with people with those additional needs, we need to be more flexible in our approach and try and spend more time to gain more information to get the wider picture.
Yeah,
that is what healthcare isn't good at.
Yeah, that's fascinating. Actually, I think you're right. I think it is really, it's not really thought about quite a lot, and it's quite there's a big component missing to it, which needs to be kind of looked into. So in terms of the patients that you see most frequently, what sort of disabilities, if that's saying it correctly, do they have? Like, for example, Down syndrome patients or
Yeah, and do you know what? Don't worry about putting your foot in it with stuff, because I recognise that the people for whom we see are out of the ordinary for most mainstream practitioners. So the fact that you're wanting to engage on this is a positive step in my book. So we're not going to wrist slap on anybody who's coming from the best point of view.
And we're students anyway, so we're here to learn.
Yeah, you're going to play that card. I've tried that. I've tried the new guy card actually, where I worked for 7 years. It still sort of works. I think one of the challenges of being a learning disability physio is that you are a profession in of itself. So say you've got a orthopedic traumatic, a person with a learning disability who has a traumatic fracture, not fractured knoth, okay?
Yeah.
Go in for a hemi. Who are you going to be rehabbed by? The learning disability physio, because you've got a learning disability. Okay. Say you have a Down syndrome and you have a stroke. Who are you going to be rehabbed by? The learning disability physio, because you've got a learning disability. You've got somebody with non-specific low back pain. Who are you going to be seen by? The learning disability physio, because you've got a learning disability. So we have to be a profession in of ourselves under an umbrella. And what I'm trying to do in my engagement in social media and training courses is break out of that and say, actually, this is wrong. If you or I had these things, we'd be seen by the person who is best able to support that person based on their medical need, not the fact that they may have some additional needs which don't, that may take a little bit more time for us. So,
sure.
So I see everybody from people who are very profound in their presentation of learning disability, and that includes physical disability, so complex neurological, cerebral palsy, genetic disorders, can't communicate with themselves, and for them to understand that they have needs that other people need to help them with is quite a big step in that cognitive functioning. I also work with people who have jobs, are athletes, and live lives and relationships, have children, who also happen to have a learning disability, and it's a really broad spectrum of clientele and patients. I love that because I like variety and clearly have a short attention span. I'm not the sort of physio who could say, Joel, do you know what, the PCL is a particularly interesting ligament, and I'm going to dedicate my career to looking at that. That would bore me to death. But I like the variety that comes with that. Having said that, we are 400 and 500 physiotherapists specializing in learning disabilities for a population of an estimated 1.5, 1.6 million people. 3% of the population, and those figures don't stack up. So we need better understanding of mainstream healthcare practitioners and students coming through the system, so that when you go into mainstream practice, you can be better able and set to meet the needs of people who have a learning disability.
So what do you think needs to be done, if we're talking the very beginning or the earliest stage possible? What can be done to get people into these jobs as a physio for learning disabilities? Are we talking university modules? Are we talking placements? Where it begins, and what will be the process?
So I think at the moment there's some movement. So I do some undergraduate lecturing and postgraduate lecturing at universities, thankfully to Zoom around the country now. And modules are a start. The challenges that the undergraduate curriculum, as you guys are probably all listening to this aware of, is busy. And there is a lot of competing for time. My argument always comes back to the fact that the fundamentals of supporting people who have a learning disability are common skills which will apply to every patient. So about ability to build rapport with an individual, ability to gain consent and trust within a patient-therapist relationship, the ability to understand that, to assess whether or not somebody's got the capacity and is able to understand and truly get a grasp on what you're telling them in a therapist-patient interaction. So none of those things are specifically that niche, but my argument always comes back to the fact that, if you understand those things, I see people without a learning disability as well. So I operate in private practice, and I see neuro rehab, backs, knees. I do sports work as well for Special Olympics GB. So, all the skills that I have of supporting people who have a learning disability are equally applicable to mainstream physiotherapy. And I'd like to think that people that I see who don't have a learning disability value my skills just as much as people who do. So I think the fundamentals of communication are important. I think there needs to be, some universities do have modules on learning disabilities and mental health. The challenge there is it becomes a bit of a bolt-on, and people who don't necessarily see the value of it may not engage quite as well. Whereas if those skills are fundamental and interwoven into every single clinical interaction in every module that's done at university, and maybe less time spent doing shoulder tests and electrotherapy, then we maybe see a way forward, because we understand that MSK is currently seeing the benefits of the person-centered practice and the therapist-patient relationship. And we're sort of sat going, where have you been for the last 20 years, guys? We've been focusing on this for so long. And that maybe less of this hierarchical therapist-patient interaction and more of a person-to-person connection. And so I think where it starts is awareness, because a lot of people that I see and a lot of students that we take from university are like, I didn't even know this was a thing. And I have a particular beef with other learning disability physios in so much as we're not very good at shouting about what we do. So any chance I can get to hear my own voice, or to engage and spread the message of this is a niche or a specialism within the profession, then I will jump on it, because I think it's vitally important, not because of me, but because the people that we see are being failed by the healthcare system that isn't structured in a way that is able to support them.
Yeah, just going back to the wide variety of cases you see as well as people. How do you manage that on a day-to-day basis? If you're seeing you've got neuro patients, you've got MSK patients, and everybody's been lumped in together to you as a learning disability case. How do you manage that? What's your process? Do you get involved in the multidisciplinary team? Do you bring other specialists in? What's your situation?
I think for a lot of people, a core set of physiotherapy skills are applicable and usable, and the things that you learn around MSK, neuro, and whatever are, you know, well, for want of a better phrase, people with learning disabilities get the same health ailments that everyone else does. People have got arms and legs, backs, joints that can play up and malfunction. And so that core skills that you learn at university, keeping those going, I think has been really good for me. If I'd have gone to work in an MSK setting and then gone into learning disabilities, I probably may have struggled.
Yeah.
But I think because I sort of came out of uni and went into this area, that's helped me to go, oh my God, I need to keep my CPD up in this area, in this area, in this area. So that's been really useful, and I've found that it sort of becomes, you know, I work I'm currently managing a team at a further education college. There's 10 of us, seeing about 150 people a week. Not everybody's full time, so don't do the maths on that one. But it kind of just becomes, and it's you know it's how it's always worked, and so therefore, you know, you don't necessarily you don't separate it out. I think physiotherapy is very good as a profession of going, that's an MSK issue, that's a neuro issue, that's a whatever issue, that's respiratory. Whereas here, you can't separate those things out. We've got somebody this morning who's complex neurological case, also has respiratory needs suction. So we do their passive mobilization, standing work, we do their work for their neuro, their splints and whatnot, but we also give them suction because that's what you do. And so it's hard to, within people, I think, you know, one thing that my undergraduate course was potentially could have been better at is looking at the people are seldom going to fall into one of your lovely little predefined areas of physiotherapy. And so you need to be prepared for a bit of anything, really.
Yeah.
Sort of doesn't really answer the question, but sort of does, kind of.
Yeah, it's perfect.
Yeah.
So what people do you take from placement? Like what university?
So we take students from University of Nottingham and Sheffield Hallam University. We're located in North Nottinghamshire, actually in the middle of Sherwood Forest, so there's worse places to be.
Nice.
Yeah.
We're on a 36-acre woodland campus with a farm, and we're climbing wall and bits and bobs. So yeah, it's a nice place to be. We do take elective students as well, and we've taken students from as far away as Poland and Hungary. So we've had some students, I don't quite know how they found out about us, but anyway, they wanted to come across. And we've had elective students from sort of around the country for, you know, bits and bobs. There's been a real surge in people who are looking at pre-course work experience placements as well. So we take a lot from the local area who are looking to try and gain experience in some area of physiotherapy in order to qualify for a course in the first place. And I'm very passionate about that because I think we can all appreciate and attest to the struggles of trying to find work experience.
Yeah,
for sure.
And so any chance that we can give, particularly with this being a relatively specialist area, I'm all for that. And actually, you know, we've taken people on as volunteers as well. Some people have volunteered before doing their university degree application because then they've got a wealth of experience in supporting people. So yeah, that's kind of where we're taking people at the moment. And yeah, it seems to work pretty well.
That sounds amazing. So did you say you had your own practice, or are you working out of the hospital?
So I am going to be in 2 weeks, actually, from today. Actually, no, the 6th of December, I'll be going on my own. Actually, I'm due to finish this position here as clinical lead physiotherapist at this college, because I don't know if I have a hole in the brain or something, or lost leave of my senses. I thought I'd decide to give up, you know, VR systems and hydro pools and all the equipment you could ever look at to go it alone. So I'm going to be, or I'm in the process of transitioning into my own business, which is focusing on physiotherapy for people with learning disabilities and complex neurological cases, but also focusing on undergraduate teaching and running training and development courses for mainstream healthcare professionals. And the idea is that we want to try and skill up mainstream healthcare practice so that people who've got learning disabilities can access the specialists, really.
Yeah, that sounds incredible. Sounds like it's really pushing the needle forward in this area.
I'm hoping so. And, you know, the reason I started my whole sort of raison d'etre about being the LD Physio is, you know, I sort of was a lurker on social media for the best part of 3 or 4 years early in my practice. And, you know, there's a lot of high profile MSK physios. There's a few well-known neurophysios, there's a couple of good respiratory physios and pelvic health physios as well. And I was like, there isn't anybody talking about health inequality. And MSK, and not to say that, not that I have a beef with MSK, but MSK are so worried about days lost to back pain and the impact of that on the economy. Whereas I'm like, people with learning disabilities are dying 20 years younger than the general population.
Yeah.
And that is after comorbidities are taken into account. So if you have a learning disability, which remember what that definition is, not medical, then you will on average die 17 to 20 years younger than the general population.
That's shockingly
so low, isn't it?
Yeah,
and that's just for not being able to understand and take on new information.
Wow.
When you add in comorbidities, the stats go to sort of 30 or 40 years less than the general population. My brother, who I spoke about earlier on in the podcast, he sadly passed away last August. And just thinking of diagnostic overshadowing, John had a hernia and was admitted to hospital 4 times with acute pain in the hernia. It wasn't treated and wasn't operated on, and the hernia became strangulated, and he died from that. And how many people do you hear without a learning disability who die from a strangulated hernia?
Many.
I've done the maths, it's not many.
So sorry to hear that.
No, I appreciate that, and I'm sorry to drop that bomb in the middle, but it shows that these are real people. We talk about 20, 30 years. What does that mean? That means that actually I don't have a big brother anymore.
Yeah.
My daughter doesn't have an uncle who she loved. These are real people who are really loved, and we have a societal issue of what we place value on. And that's been even heightened throughout the COVID pandemic, when at the start of things you'd hear, remember at the start of COVID when it was like, there's been so many deaths, 20 deaths today from COVID, all of them had pre-existing healthcare conditions. And I'm like, yeah, I used to take an inhaler as a kid. That'll be a pre-existing healthcare condition, but that doesn't mean it's okay for me to die.
No.
This kind of notion that pre-existing healthcare condition makes it okay and therefore it doesn't matter really gets my goat up. John had pre-existing healthcare conditions, but had he died early in the pandemic, you'd be devastated. That they're people, and all too often that gets lost. So that sort of raising awareness of why I started as the LD Physio on social media after years of lurking, and sort of swallowed my pride to be able to say somebody needs to speak about that, and nobody was. And I was like, oh crap, I think that's going to be me, and here we are. So
gosh, that's such a good thing to come out of what's happened.
Tragic,
I
mean, and actually that this was always the plan before that, and I'd always, so I'd planned to transition into this business anyways, and I talked about diagnostic overshadowing, and I talked about health inequalities. I never actually thought that those figures and facts would come home to roost.
Right.
I talked about them before. I used John as an example, but when obviously John passed, it was almost like, wow, it sort of, they came home to roost, and very, very tragic. So that's why people need to know about it, and that's why I'm really appreciative that you guys are sat recording this, and that hopefully people at home are listening.
Yeah, we've got in our cohort, we've got people who have spoken to us. We've told people that we're going to be talking to you, and they're really interested in hearing that. And both Sophie and I have relatives who have learning disabilities. There is an interest out there in these kind of areas, and it hadn't even occurred to me, to be completely honest with you, Alistair, about the fact that that the life expectancy of people with learning disabilities is lower. I knew it was lower because of comorbidities.
I didn't think it would be that low.
I didn't know. I had no idea it would be that low.
Yeah.
It is actually shocking. It's a bit great to say it.
It certainly should, and it is interesting to hear that you guys have got a personal connection, because I think there was a study done that showed there are about 13 million people in the UK that have a personal connection to somebody with a learning disability.
Yeah.
There are people out there that do care, and even if you don't, there are still people out there that care, and it's a case of how do we try and unify voices to try and affect change. Therein lies the challenge.
Yeah, that's so true. So it sounds like this overshadowing of people with like learning disabilities and them not being seen, you're quite passionate about it. So is that going to be kind of one of your foundational pillars for this business that you're setting up?
I think when it comes, sorry, say that last bit again.
Like trying to combat this kind of overshadowing and not looking properly.
Yeah, hugely, and I think, and that comes, you know, primarily through the sort of the training element and the teaching element at undergraduate and at university level, but also, as I mentioned, at the courses. And you know, I've developed not to plug myself here, but there's hopefully you can edit this out if you're not happy with this, but there's running a one-day course in Liverpool in 2022 that's a one-day looking at learning disability for MSK professionals, and it's tailored towards MSK practice, and there are some students going to be on there where we're going to spend the day digging into learning disabilities a little bit deeper, because a lot of the stuff that we do is like an hour and a half, and that's, you can barely scratch the surface of some of the challenges. And you can see with the breadth of learning disability practice, there's a lot to get into there, and we haven't even touched the surface of the legal side of things. So yes is the short answer. Another way that we're going to be doing that is through, so I'm also, the title is the Clinical Director for Health and Wellbeing for Special Olympics Great Britain, which is a mouthful. Now I volunteer as Team GB physiotherapist for Special Olympics Great Britain. The Special Olympics is a branch of the Olympics, in the same way that the Paralympics is, but within the Paralympics, there is a focus on elite sport, and it is primarily for people with a physical disability. There is a classification of people with a learning disability, but the Spanish basketball team in 2004 put pay to that by lying about having learning disabilities and winning the gold medal, and then all learning disability classifications got ripped out and are slowly starting to be put back in. Whereas the Special Olympics was set up by Eunice Shriver Kennedy, who is John F. Kennedy's sister, with a focus on showing what people with learning disabilities can do through sport. It's focused on achievement, and it's not about the best people, it's about meaningful competition. And so whereas in the Paralympics it's about the fastest versus the fastest, in the Special Olympics, and in the Paralympics you will also be classified with people of a similar disability, so say an amputee versus an amputee. In the Special Olympics we look at what can somebody do, so how fast can you run a race, and then you will be classified in a heat with people who are a second either side of whatever your ability is. So you will have a meaningful race with people of a similar ability, and you'll be given a platform to perform, to be able to shine, and to show what can happen through sport, and using that as a lever for social mobility. Now, don't worry if you've not heard about it, because in the UK it's not very well publicised. But I was lucky enough to be in Los Angeles in 2015 in front of 80,000 people and Michelle Obama. And then in 2019, we were in Abu Dhabi with Team GB, where ESPN were live streaming the entire thing in the US. So internationally, it's big business. It's not quite so well represented in the UK. But anyway, so what does that was a bit of context about what Special Olympics is. But what we do in that is I run the screening at every national event or international event. We provide free health screening for athletes taking part. And the idea is that we screen, I head up the physiotherapy screening, but there's podiatrists, ophthalmologists, audiologists, dentists, I think sometimes psychologists are involved as well. And the idea is we provide free health screening, and then we refer on into NHS services. So we make the athletes who have a learning disability more aware of their own health, and we signpost into mainstream services. One of the other things that we do is we train up volunteers from the local area. So in 2017, we held one in Sheffield at the National Games, where we had 85 volunteers from the local area, including Sheffield Hallam University undergrads. And it was almost operated like clinical placement. And the idea is then that we leave a legacy when the events moved on, of healthcare practitioners who are better able to engage people who have a learning disability. So that's another way that we're trying to combat this diagnostic overshadow, and it is through exposure. Because the best way that you can engage with people with learning disabilities is literally through just being with people, and it comes through trial and error to an extent.
Yeah.
So where is it in 2023?
Well, funnily enough, there should have been one in Liverpool in 2021.
Is it every 2 years?
So it's the national championships are every 4 years.
Right.
They do sometimes have smaller regional events as well, but they're not necessarily screened at all the different professions. So there's every 2 years is the international events. We have a Summer Olympics and a Winter Olympics.
Yeah.
The Winter Olympics was due to be in Sweden, but I don't know if COVID might have kiboshed that as well.
Yes. As it has so many things.
Indeed. But the national ones, the British Championships, were due to be in Liverpool in 2021. That got postponed and then until next year, and then that got cancelled, unfortunately. So that's not happening. So I'm not entirely sure where or when the next ones are due to be happening. But if you found it fit, follow me on social media, I will certainly be sending out the requests for help.
We will take you up on that. We will be the first to come for that.
We will be, yeah. Both of us are really interested in. I'm really interested in working with initially Paralympians. But I'm very easily persuaded to start to diversify into Special Olympians. That'd be amazing.
This is awesome. We are really following
fabulous. No, it's fabulous, and I think, much as I do it as a voluntary thing, obviously the Paralympic physios are still funded. Special Olympics is in a different sort of
bracket.
Bracket when it comes to understanding and funding, and so it still needs volunteers. But I think the more that we can push it out there, the more we garner awareness, the more people are involved, and that hopefully gains a bit of traction in of itself. In the same way that 2012 was, they talk about the watershed moment for the Paralympic movement. Hopefully there can be a point where we have that for Special Olympics as well.
Amazing.
So thinking about research in kind of both theoretical and clinical, what if you had time, or if you wanted somebody to do some research, what would it be to do with, like, in learning disabilities? Would it be certain kind of a certain disability, or a certain technique, or a method? How would it be?
So research with learning disabilities is widely underreported. And actually it's got so bad that we've started to research into how people with learning disabilities die. There's a thing called the LEADER project, which you may have heard of, from the University of Bristol, and they do investigations into everybody with a learning disability who dies that's reported to them. And the idea is that we can look at lessons learned from how people die. And I think that's quite a sad state of affairs, that we can't necessarily include people in research of how to keep people alive. We have to look at how people die. I think my bias is physical activity and exercise. Look, I believe if it could be put in pill form, it'd be hailed a wonder drug. And somebody would either get very rich or very famous off it. It isn't, and so I would like to look at physical activity levels of people with a learning disability, and maybe some more evidence to show. Well, let's suppose it's a research question. Does physical activity have an impact on the physical well-being of people with learning disabilities? And then I think that could be used as a positive conduit for change when it comes to looking at funding for sport, physical activity levels, and accessibility for people with a learning disability.
Yes.
I often say, if you have not necessarily even a learning disability, but if you go to a mainstream gym and you cannot get out of your wheelchair yourself, how much kit could you get on? What could you do in that gym? And you can probably name 2-3 pieces of kit that you could get into if you're in your wheelchair.
Yeah, as in transfer from your wheelchair to the kit.
If you can do that yourself, that's fine. Yeah, that's much easier. But if you can't get out of your chair yourself, it's a real challenge. So I mean, there's tons, and if people want to drop into the DMs, I could talk all day about research questions. But I think physical activity is the one that we need to hold up, because things around obesity as a comorbidity for people with learning disabilities, it's vastly higher than the general population. Another big challenge is respiratory acquired infections. So aspiration, pneumonia, or pneumonia in general, is actually the biggest killer of people with a learning disability, who have dysphagia as well. So there's a lot to look at there. I mean, the rest of it from a physiotherapy point of view, look, I think a lot of the evidence is relatively applicable. You know, people with learning disabilities have high mobility, general population have high mobility. People with learning disabilities may have heart conditions, general population of heart conditions. So there's a lot that you can extrapolate from mainstream evidence.
Yes.
Or at least that's how I built my practice over the years, due to a relative dearth of information. I think the challenge comes in how do we adapt our practice to support the understanding and communication side of things, because that, I think, is where the crux lies in how we deliver our clinical treatments.
Yeah, I really like that. Yeah.
So my if I was in your position, my question would be more about, I guess, around about the communication and the reporting of information from the patient's circle, because I don't want to assume anything, but I assume that when you've got a new patient, you're taking patient history, then actually a lot of the questions you're asking is more to the circle of the patient rather than the patient themselves. And my question would be, how can we improve the communication? How can we change the way in which learning disabilities is viewed, so that we can then try and solve these other issues, such as life.
I mean, these are the big questions, aren't they? You know, how do we overcome diagnostic shadowing? How do we change societal views and value of people with learning disabilities? Those are some big ticket questions, and you can sort of lose your head in a wood for the trees situation with that. Yeah. What I sort of approach that with is targeted of let's look at what we can influence and what can we affect. And specifically around your communication, I often pose that as a question. I'm like, you know, I think it's one of my favorite things when trying to sell this new course is, how would you complete a subjective if the person didn't understand or able to answer you? And the answer is, you would still speak to the person first. In any situation or interaction, for me, I will always say hello to the person first, and then say and then gauge the reaction that I get from that, because I might not have seen this person before, and if I interact with them, it might be that they have a longer processing time before they can respond. It might be that actually I'm not going to gain any sort of response. It might be that they don't want to open up to me. And so at that point, then only do I go to the people who are around and say, oh, I see you've got somebody with you. Do you mind if I say hello to this person? Hi, how are you? But it all comes centered from that person. And you know, if I'm in a subjective assessment, you hit the nail on the head, is you need to try and figure out and gain information wherever you can. And that usually comes from supporting circles. One of the challenges is, if you've got somebody who's come from a residential care facility, quite often you might get a staff member who's just been told, go and take this person to this appointment. And you're sort of sat there going, and you ask the staff member, and the staff member's got no understanding. That's not necessarily their fault. No. But it does severely influence and impact how you engage with that person. But one of the things that we do cover on the course is, because it goes back to how you engage with people in the first instance and how you structure your clinic. If you make people aware that you have an understanding of additional needs, that you can then prepare them and prepare yourself in such a way to be able to better meet those needs by giving additional time, more, maybe a different location for clinical assessment, maybe a double slot, maybe reminding people to bring information that may be more relevant to them. People have things called traffic light assessments or hospital passports, which have a wealth of information about the person's medical history, needs, wants, communication, significant others. Those are really, really useful bits of kit. But yeah, it's not a small thing.
No, it sounds like there's a lot of barriers. I mean, that's what I'm kind of gathering from this kind of chat. There's a lot of barriers to learning disabilities, but equally there's a lot of solutions, possibly not equal, but a lot of solutions that are possibilities. But then there's another barrier to implement it, which is kind of like a chain effect that keeps on going, which makes everything a bit harder. Which is,
and I think one of the things that we, when we come to hitting those barriers, that's where, again, not the course, but where we talk about understanding your legal rights and your legal responsibilities as a healthcare practitioner, supporting somebody with a learning disability. Because as soon as somebody comes in with a learning disability, you do have powers under the Equality Act and the Medical Capacity Act that will enable you to adjust how you engage with that person for the betterment of their healthcare outcome. The challenge comes if that person rocks up and you didn't know that they had a learning disability. So you've got a next 20-minute back-to-back MSK follow-up appointment booked in next session. There becomes a challenge. And in a healthcare system that is bursting at the seams and is overflowing, it's how do we accommodate that? Well, I think we accommodate that by adapting ourselves. Again, it's a bit like the university question. It doesn't become a bolt-on. Somebody with learning disability isn't an addition to your clinic. Your clinic is running away that if somebody has additional needs, that they are able to signpost themselves to you, and you can plan and prep yourself for that. And that is something that would work for anybody, whether they've got anxiety, mental health issues, learning disabilities, just communication disabilities after having a stroke or whatever. Everybody benefits. And I always say this, when you build a world or a clinic with accessibility in mind, it doesn't just benefit people who have a learning disability, it benefits everybody.
Yes.
Yeah, that's a really good note, actually. Wow, I feel like I'm learning so much. I wish I could just sit and chat all day with you. But I'm very conscious that you're very busy. So just a final question. This is one that we quite like to ask people.
We ask everyone.
Yeah, if you had a kind of a patient or a story that made you think, wow, this is what I want to be doing. This is my purpose. What would your story be?
So my story isn't actually about. So my story pertains more to the Special Olympics a little bit. My involvement with the Special Olympics started as by taking my brother John to the local athletics club at Don Valley Stadium. I think it became the Jessica Innes Stadium and then has now been pulled down, unfortunately. We used to take him down there on a Tuesday night, I think, to his local athletics club. And I'm a bit of an extrovert, as you're probably aware. And I was like, oh, do you want me to I'll pick the cones in. There was 10, 15 people with learning disability, 2 coaches, and they're just engaged in athletics through the guise of Special Olympics. And then there was a competition that came up, which was the Nationals, which was 2009 in Leicester it was. And that was a really, really big event. It was the British Championships, and I attended that as John's sort of personal assistant, John, to help him with his medication, help with his personal care, help with just day-to-day stuff, make sure he's organised and support him. And there was a lady who, so there was a race, 8 people in the race, and this lady came woefully last, woefully from the point of view of part of competition. She was very, very far behind in the race. And actually, when it came to the podium ceremony, one of the things in Special Olympics is everybody goes onto the podium and everyone gets a recognition.
Yeah.
There's still gold, silver, and bronze, but everybody will get at least a ribbon or will be celebrated and will have their name read out. And this person who'd come dead last was on the podium in absolute floods of tears because she was there and because some celebrity was giving her an award, and her name was read out over the tannoy in the same way that it was for the person who came first. And she was in floods of tears. She was shouting to her mum, "Mom, are you watching?" And I just thought, do you know what? I want to be part of an organisation that gives people this sort of feeling.
Yeah.
And I want to help give more people that feeling, because for people with learning disabilities who have so many areas of their lives controlled, to have some area of and told what you can't do and you can't do this and you've got a learning disability, so you need help with this, to be able to stand there and be recognised for what you did do is powerful.
Yeah. That sounds amazing.
That's my story.
Yeah.
No, that is brilliant. That's a really good one, actually. That's made me so happy.
Okay.
Yeah. No, that's fabulous. Well, thank you so much for taking time out of your day to chit chat with us. We've loved having you on. This is gonna be eye-opening for a lot of people. So thank you.
Oh, thank you both, guys. I appreciate you reaching out and taking the time to highlight this. And hopefully, if anybody has some more questions, drop me a message on Twitter or Insta. I'm not on TikTok because I don't. Read out
your Instagram address.
So the Instagram is _the LD Physio _. I couldn't have the usual one for some reason. And Twitter is @the LD Physio.
Brilliant.
Give him a like, give him a follow. And if you want more information on courses or how to get involved, then drop him a little DM.
Thank you very much, guys.
Thank you very much for your time.
Take care. Bye.